When you really start to dig into the idea of growing seasonal flowers, you quickly realize that there's a lot of moving parts that go into it. And I know from personal experience just how overwhelming it can feel. Knowing when to plant bulbs versus seeds, when to divide dahlia tubers, or when to buy supplies, it can frustrate you to the point where you just don't ever get started with growing anything. I know that when I first started out, I didn't understand the cycle of the year as it related to flower farming at all. And so in this video, I wanted to share my experience. Whether you have interest in growing seasonal blooms yourself, or you just want a behind the scenes peek into how we do it, today I'm breaking down my process for how we plan our full year of in-season blooms. So let's get started. Growing seasonally is really something that we have achieved over time. Our first season, we grew only tender annuals, those flowers that bloom during the summer months. The following year, we added pumpkins so that we could offer a fall farm stand to our customers. And it wasn't until the year after that we added winter porch pots. And now this fourth year is really our first attempt at spring offerings. We're dipping our toes into it this spring and then really gonna hit it harder next year once we have some experience under our belt. So as you can see, seasonal flowers has really been a gradual progression for us, not something that we attempted to do all at once. Now I know, even planning for one season, especially when you have little to no experience, can feel intimidating. Whenever we take on what feels like a big project, there's a lot of different options that we can choose from. And specifically when we're talking about flowers, there's really no limit to the choices that we have. You know, you have to decide on what varieties to grow and what colors and how many of each variety to plant. And when you're faced with all those hard decisions at once, that's when things can start to feel paralyzing, because honestly, most of us are just afraid of making the wrong decision. And this is why step one of planning for me, it's beginning with the end in mind. When I have a clear idea of what my end goal is, and when I have at least some idea of what I'm aiming for, that's what really gives me clarity with those hard questions that I just mentioned. I know it can be tempting to dive right in, but if you don't have at least some idea of the direction you're headed, it's truly anybody's guess of how you'll get there. Seriously, there's no wrong way to plant a flower garden, but let me give you an example to help illustrate what I'm talking about. Because if my goal was to plant flowers that I could sell at a farmer's market, and that was my business's main focus, the types of flowers and the colors I choose would be very different than if my goal was to grow flowers that would be used for event florals like weddings. In that case, I'd plant probably more pastels and whites and apricots. And my garden still would look very different if I was growing flowers purely for my own enjoyment. I mean, I definitely grow much less. Now, believe it or not, I'm a very visual person. And while I love a good spreadsheet and running the numbers and knowing the analytics of everything, I really have to be able to see my goals before I get started. And that's why almost every year before the season gets underway, I spend some time creating like a pretty standard vision board. I mean, it's nothing fancy. I simply print out pictures that I find on the internet and I cut and paste everything onto some poster board. It's really standard, but having this hang in my office is what honestly keeps me inspired and excited to take action. And it really helps me to see the bigger picture, especially during those hard days when I feel like I'm stuck doing this sort of mundane task that just need to get done. To sort of give you a better idea of what our vision at Two Sisters Flower Farm looks like for the year, it goes something like this. We aim to provide a flush of unique early spring blooms. Things like tulips, daffodils, ranunculus, and anemones early on in the year. We then focus on garden bouquets that showcase sunflowers and zinnias and dahlias all summer long. Our goal in the fall is to have plenty of heirloom pumpkins and potted mums available, and then once winter hits, we enjoy being able to help you decorate your homes with fresh porch pots and evergreen wreaths and festive centerpieces. So once we have an understanding of what we hope to accomplish from our season, the question then really becomes, well, how are we going to achieve this? Taking this vision and turning it into a reality is really accomplished in step 2 of our planning process, where we work it backwards. Step 2 is where we identify the best that we can, the steps that are going to help us reach the goals that we have set for ourselves back in step 1. I really find it helpful to work that big goal down into its small parts because it allows me to, in a sense, connect my big goal to the reality, that place where I'm at currently. Once we have a broad sense of what we'd like to accomplish throughout the year, that's when I start working everything backwards. taking that big goal and chunking it down into manageable steps. It's the only way that I can make progress toward my goals without feeling the overwhelm from trying to tackle such a big project all at once. Now again, let me give you an example of how this really plays out for us. So the vision that we created for our seasonal blooms, here it is. Because we're working with Mother Nature, much of what we do is affected by our first and our last frost dates. Our summer flower garden blooms during our frost-free growing season. Here in Michigan, that frost-free growing season, it usually lasts from mid-May to mid-October. And in order to grow a 1/4 acre of cut flowers during that time, we have to have either seeds or transplants ready to go in the ground about May 15th. Now, I'll go into more detail of how we specifically plan that annual field in another video. But this means that if I plan on getting a jump on the season, then I have to start seeds indoors about 6 to 8 weeks prior to May 15th, which puts us in mid-March, which again means that supplies like seed starting mix, seed trays, and of course seeds, well, they need to be ordered well before March. Now on the other hand, tulips and daffodils, which we harvest in the spring, they require a cooling period, and to allow for that, we have to plant our bulbs in the ground during the fall while the ground is still workable, so that they have all winter to cool. Now, even though ranunculus anemones are spring blooms, they can't handle our cold winters, and so we plant them in very early spring, about 6 to 8 weeks prior to our last frost date. And in terms of our fall crops, our goal is to have a fully stocked fall farm stand. We tend to associate pumpkins with Halloween, but because I want to allow enough time for people to purchase their fall decorated items, my goal is to really have pumpkins ready for sale early September. Now, most pumpkins, they take anywhere between 90 to 100 days to mature, so I need to plant our pumpkins either late May or very early June. And I obviously need pumpkin seeds for that task, so I need to place my seed order well before May to make sure that everything arrives in time. Now, these are all simple examples, and for the sake of time, yes, I'm skipping over some detail, but the general concept is how I plan everything on our farm. My goals when I first got started with seasonal blooms were largely based on just getting familiar with growing different crops of flowers, of pumpkins, or of mums. And as I've gained experience and I've dedicated more time to turning my hobby into a full-fledged business, my goals have centered around hitting certain revenue goals. And working it backwards has again been my lifeline in this. Instead of planting, as many flowers as I can and just hoping for the best, I found it easier to name my revenue goals. I know that if I wish to make an extra $1,000 a month from selling mixed bouquets, then what really needs to happen is I need to sell about 50 bouquets priced at $20 each per month, or about 13 bouquets a week. If each bouquet has about 20 stems in it, then I need to be able to harvest about 260 stems a week to meet that goal. Knowing what milestones I need to hit to ultimately reach those big goals I've set for myself is what has helped me most in actually being successful with what I've set out to do. Actually executing on that plan that I've created and recording what's worked and what hasn't is the last and final step in my planning process. Doing this enough times is what's helped me find my rhythm with flower farming, so that planning an entire year of seasonal blooms, it no longer feels as daunting as it once did. Now I know that this step, it may seem minor in comparison, but it's really important. I want to be able to repeat the wins that I've experienced, and I also want to make sure that I'm not repeating the same mistakes year after year. After all, the only way that I've been able to refine my systems is by keeping track of what I've done and continually improving upon them. For me, the best way that I found to do this is by getting everything out on paper in a format where I can see it all in a single glance. Every year I print out one of these giant wall calendars and I tape it to my wall, and I make sure to jot down the dates which I completed every task. Now, I also keep much more detailed notes in a large spreadsheet, but being able to compare what I actually did with the results that I got, it allows me to know when something needs to be adjusted. For example, one of my goals last year was to plant sunflowers weekly so that I could have a continuous flush of them all summer long. Last year, I didn't get my first round of seeds planted until mid-June, which meant it took a while for those seeds to bloom. This year, it's important for me to get those seeds in earlier so that I have sunflowers blooming much sooner. Now trust me, even with this 3-step planning process that I have outlined in this video, things still go wrong. we make mistakes, we hit resistance, we still get nervous to sometimes take those next steps that we know that we need to take. But I will say that the planning process does get easier with time. At first, it can all seem like too much, but as you gain experience and you find your rhythm, planning seasonal blooms, whether you want to grow them for yourself to enjoy in your backyard, or you want to start a business like we have, it will start to feel like second nature. If you'd like to learn more about how we plan our annual field of cut flowers, then be sure to check back here next week where I will break it all down for you. If you're enjoying these videos, we'd love it if you give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button below. And until next time, I will see you in the next video.